Welcome to Adoption Matters, where our adoptee-centric trispective approach honors every voice in the adoption constellation. We believe that by listening to the adoptees, birth families, and adoptive parents, we can help families grow stronger together. I'm so glad you're here with us today. I hope you'll join me, Kim Noeth, birth mom, along with my co-host Sharon, Butler Obazee, an adoptee, and Sally Ankerfelt, an adoptive parent. Together, we're looking forward to having a challenging conversation with Linda Sexton, who is our special guest today. So today we're joined by a truly special guest, Linda. Linda Sexton is a speaker, an author, and an open adoption pioneer. Linda is a passionate advocate for open adoption, and she's the mother of 2 adopted children. For more than 3 decades, she has shared insights, tools, and heartfelt reflections to help adoptive families navigate emotional complexity with openness, transparency, and love. Her work offers encouragement and clarity to new and waiting adoptive parents, helping them embrace birth-family connections as essential to their child's identity, wholeness, and stability. Linda is also the author of the award-winning memoir, The Branches We Cherish, an adoption memoir, which we'll talk about more later in this episode. Linda, welcome to Adoption Matters. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you, Kim. I am thrilled to be here.
Thought we'd dive right in at first and kind of ask you, as an adoptive parent who has walked this path with openness and intention, what kind of stands out for you in navigating the holidays with your family, especially in open adoption?
Yes, the holidays, I've been thinking a lot about what stands out for the holidays. And, the mindset, what comes to my mind is that the mindset that an adoptive parent has, if they can have this mindset that your birth family is your family, that makes such a difference. And as I reflect, it's really not just the holidays, it's special occasions. And this idea of how do you treat special occasions? And I remember when I started this, and it was over 30 years ago, my oldest Finley is 30 years now. And Finley's birth mom called me and asked me, can Finley be a flower child in my wedding? Finley was 4 years old. And at that time, I didn't have the mindset that birth families are your family. And my husband and I had to sit down and really think about this. Is this the right thing? How is this going to affect the child? How's this going to affect our family? And we decided, yes, we would go ahead and Finley could be a flower child in Jenna's wedding. And what happened was at the wedding, when they were at the altar, that Finley was up there and they had Finley stand there with the whole wedding party in the middle of the ceremony. And Finley started looking at me and started quivering. I knew they were about to cry, and they jumped down off of the riser and they ran down the middle of the church and plopped right in my lap. And that was such an affirmation for me that I am Finley's mom, but there's room in Finley's life for me and for birth mom Jenna. And it struck me that day that, wait a minute, Jenna is our family. And so Finley was 4 years old, and it still even took me a little while to really get that mindset. So when you think about holidays, once I finally got that mindset, and then during my second adoption, I had that mindset, and decisions became so much easier. So during the holidays, I thought, well, what do I do with my family? That is my sisters. How do I treat them during the holidays? And my sisters and I all live in different states, so we actually don't physically get together for Christmas, we did for Thanksgiving, but not for Christmas time. But at the holidays, I would send them obviously pictures and gifts, and I'd usually send a gift basket with some, wonderful treats for the whole family. And I thought, well, that's what I should do for the birth families. they're my family. So what would I do for my sister who's out of state? And my birth families were also out of state. So once I got that mindset, it became so much easier to think about how do you treat your relationship with birth families during the holidays.
Wow.
That's really awesome.
What a wonderful story. Coming from a closed adoption, that is so significant because I didn't have access to birth parents as an adoptee growing up. And so that it warms my heart to hear that approach, Linda. I think it's very loving and accepting. And I know that your children benefited from it.
Oh, tremendously. Absolutely. Both of my children, actually, I'm going to say this, they had the privilege of knowing both their birth mom and their birth dad as they grew up. And I know that having the birth dads in the picture really was wonderful for us. And a lot of people don't have that opportunity. So we were fortunate to have that. And my children saw them, particularly when they were younger, you know, those first 5 years, we had more visitation. And then we started out in the same state, and we actually got transferred when the little one was 1. And when the older one, Finley, was 5, we got transferred out of state. So in order to see them, we had to actually get on an airplane. And we found out that over time, both of us did that. Sometimes they would get on an airplane to see us, and sometimes we would get on an airplane to see them. And in the early years, we probably saw them at least once a year. When we were in the same state, we saw them much more frequently, but at least once a year. And then as the children got older, it was more difficult. But then FaceTime came in, and they could FaceTime.
Yeah.
But the holidays and special occasions are just so very important. And it can really make a difference to both the children and the birth families.
You know, Linda, as you were talking about how, you know, like things changed as the kids grew up, you know, from year to year. I'm curious, I'm assuming that holidays shifted over time for you too, how you navigated them. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, happy to, Kim. And I would say that the real shift came when my children became young adults. So as they were growing up, I was really the one that had to make all the arrangements, right? And, you know, make sure we exchanged gifts and so on and so forth, and cards and pictures. So I was the driving force. Then as my children, so now they're 30 years old and 27 years old. And what's really interesting to me is this tradition of them spending some time at Thanksgiving with their birth families has started to come to fruition for our family. And my oldest one, Finley, 2 years ago, ended up spending Thanksgiving with the birth family for the very first time. And what's so fascinating is when Finley was 17 years old, their birth parents married each other. They had split up after Finley was born, and they married other
Wow.
people. They had other children. They both had a divorce and found each other again later in life. When
Wow.
Finley was 17
Imagine
years
that.
old, they married each other. Now, we went to the wedding, of course. It was an open adoption, and of course, we were invited to the wedding. And that's when Finley really got to know their birth dad. So since then, though, what is fascinating to me is Finley moved back to Texas, and we had moved to Virginia. So that's where they grew up, in Virginia, moved back to Texas where they were born. And they were within 3 hours of birth mom and dad. And one Thanksgiving, they called me 2 years ago and said, can't make it home, Mom, you know, I'm working. But Jenna and Michael called me and said, will you come for Thanksgiving? And they did. And the grandmother was there and other siblings. And I'll just never forget when Finley called me afterwards, they were just gushing. And Finley is a vegan. So that family went out of their way to make vegan dishes for Finley at Thanksgiving.
Right.
And they were just so touched. So that was something that, Thanksgiving was really special. And then so my younger one, last year, her birth dad said, "Hey, will you come join our family for Thanksgiving? We're getting an Airbnb and we're all going to be there, all the cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents." And Belle went and spent Thanksgiving with them a whole weekend in an Airbnb, and later called me and said, "Mom, they want to do this every year. Do you mind?" And I said,
Oh,
"Of course not." So she's starting a tradition of spending Thanksgiving with her birth dad and his family. And what she loves so much is she's got little siblings, little birth siblings that
Yeah.
are now, 5 and 6 years old, and she
Wow.
sees them at least twice a year. And
Wow.
that holiday is so important to
Wow.
them. And I'm like, okay, if I can have you for Christmas, that's fine. And
Oh,
I
wow.
was thinking, it's a little bit like, when your child gets married, you have to figure out, well, who are they going to spend the holidays with? Is it going to be the husband's family or the wife's family? And
yes.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like that. And it's like, okay, well, if I can have you for Christmas, go ahead with Thanksgiving. Now, when my kids get married, if they get married, now we're going to have to figure that one out too. But it's birth families are family.
Right.
That's the thing. And if you can get that mindset, it's so much easier to make decisions. And
And the 5 and 6 year olds are not going to know a life different than when they knew that child, which I think is amazing as their sibling.
that's
You
right.
know,
That's
their
right.
earliest memories are going to include that child as a
They
sibling.
they are. And they just call her Big Sis.
Mm-hmm.
And they love that. And I remember when the one was kind of little, about 5 years old, at one point she said, "Now wait a minute, you're calling my husband dad, but your dad and my dad are both dad." And 5-year-old. And then Ricky's the birth dad, Ricky's wife just said to her daughter, "Well, yeah, Ricky is Belle's birth dad and David is Belle's dad." And the little girl said, "Oh, okay, that's fine." And she just went on. But she just knows she has this sister and that they have the same dad somehow. And it was fine with her.
Wow.
So it's really worked
And kids
out.
have that capacity to understand about grandparents, this side of the family and that side. I think we underestimate the capacity that they do have. That was a great, example of they gave enough information that the child could handle.
Right, right. And that was all she needed. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
You have
And
just met, or you've had a full circle of relationship, and making every character in the full complete circle important. I wonder what, as you navigated that, what stands out for you the most?
that it was a lot of work. One thing, maybe not the most. I mean, I'm so happy. I mean, I'm proud. I'm just so proud that my kids now talk to their birth parents, visit their birth parents, and don't even have to think about it and don't have to worry about how I feel. So it stands out that I'm proud that we came full circle, but it was a lot of work. And, at Christmas time, when you'd make your list and then you've got, I got 3 sisters and, all these kids and families, and then the birth families with all 4 parents. Sometimes at the holidays, I'd be like exhausted, just trying to figure all this stuff out. But
Mm.
it was so worth it. So worth it.
Yes, and being in the space for 30 years, that's quite an ability to be able to make that statement on this end of it. And would you say that would be the one single most important thing you've learned in navigating the two open adoptions over time, is that it does take time and to stay in it? Or tell us a little bit more.
Yeah. I think that the single most important thing that I've learned through all of this is that open adoption benefited my children, and that if if you consider the child in this triad as the North Star, the most important part of the triad, and what is best for that child. 30 years ago, it's kind of scared me. I mean, how am I going to raise a child with birth mom in the picture? Am I still going to be mom? Is she going to want her child back? Is she going to spend too much time with us? Will my child get confused? All of these things. And it really wasn't about me, and it wasn't about birth mom as much as it was for the child. And having that biological connection in their lives growing up helped them develop their identity. It helped them with stability. It helped them in so many ways. And I think about, we're all part of nature, we're part of nurture. And the adoptive mom can do, and parents can do so much nurturing. You can do a great job. But if that child doesn't see firsthand where their nature comes from, the biology, that side of it, they can end up with a big void in their life. And they can end up filling that in unhealthy ways too. But that void, by having those birth family connections and being totally transparent and answering questions honestly, and them seeing people that looked like them, maybe had some of the same quirks, even some of the same hobbies. My kids have some of the hobbies of their birth parents that I had nothing to do with. It's just kind of interesting that they naturally did some of those things. So it's the child that benefits, I guess, is what the bottom line is. It's for them, and it really, really makes a difference as they develop their identity.
Would you say, during the holidays when the emotions get intense and how grief might come in, that your approach would be to just keep a very open dialogue?
I would definitely think so. And, I did not have the experience at the holidays where my children did have grief. I'm sure that the birth families did have grief, and we've talked to them about that. But that dialogue, that ability to call them on the phone on Christmas Day and just talk to them and say, "Hey, Merry Christmas. What did Santa bring you? Tell me about it." Those things are very important, that communication and just keeping it open, I think, just helps everybody in the triad with any kind of grief that they're feeling, whether they identify it, know it, or not. So, yeah.
Amazing. And I would love to talk more about your beautiful book, The Branches We Cherish, an open adoption memoir, which received the gold medal from the Florida Writers Association. How about that? Can you
Yes.
share a little bit about what inspired you to write that and what you hope adoptive families and professionals might take away from your story?
Yes, thank you so much. I would love to. I wrote that book after I retired. I had kind of a long career, and after I retired, I really thought about this journey that we were on, and I was kind of in awe of it. And the truth is, I didn't have any guidance. I mean, 30 years ago, there was no guidance. We kind of had to make it up. And I learned so many things, and I made some mistakes, believe me. I'm telling you the wonderful story at the end, but there are things that I wish I would have done, signs that I missed, and I do write about that in the book. So I try to talk about, again, what we did well, what we could have done better. But the thing I'm most proud about is I got everybody's voices in the book. So all 4 birth parents were interviewed for the book. 2 of the birth parents, one birth dad and one birth mom, actually wrote a section that's in the book from their point of view. And a birth grandmother also wrote in the section. And then I interviewed my 2 kids as well. So I tried to get the whole triad's voice in there. And honestly, I wrote the book with the purpose of helping those that come after me, because it is a lifetime commitment. it's not for the weak. You got to be committed to it, and you got to take the good and the bad. And there's so much you need to know about raising an adopted child that is different from raising a biological child. So I really wanted to help people. And the other thing I'll say is that 100% of the author profits from that book are going to provide support and therapy for adopted persons and birth parents. And I'm doing that because my children's birth parents did not get professional help and therapy, and they needed it. And my children also needed therapists as they grew up, particularly in the teen years. And I did not have adoption competent therapists to help them. And I know that they're more available today, but even at the time, I didn't even know enough to try to find an adoption competent therapist because I didn't relate some of their issues to being adopted. I just thought they were teen issues. So I just want to help people be more educated and have the right support. So that's why I wrote the book. And anyway, I'm thrilled that it's out there right now.
Wow. Thank you, Linda. Sally, I thought you might like to have a word a little bit about perhaps how coaching has come on scene, as well as therapy.
Yeah. We are adoption competent coaches. We've got
Yes.
actually a new course that trains mental health therapists, mental health professionals, and certified coaches to be adoption competent. And what you're speaking about in terms of lifting up all parts of the all the main stakeholders in adoption and opening up the relationships that are or our potential relationships and we really lift that up with our work, not just in our coaching but also in the new coaching certification course that we do. And one thing that's great about the course too, and it kind of speaks to what you're talking about, is of course educating adoptive parents, or educating the professional to understand where adoptive parents might be, and also educating them on where an adopted person might be and where a first or birth mother might be, or a first parent. And so we bring that all together into this course. And what I like about it is we all in our coaching, the people who did the course and our coaches are also parts of the triad. And we all have had varied experiences. Like for me as an adoptive parent, I'm listening to you and I'm taking it all in. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And then I'm also sad because that's not exactly, so I feel like I want to cry. That's not exactly how it went.
Yep.
And so the coaches bring, we don't sit there and necessarily talk about where we were at, but we bring our humanity.
Yes.
And we also recognize the humanity in first parents and also in adopted people. And that kind of openness can be really bumpy, as you know. And for some people, it can be not accessible. And so then how do you make as best a possible connection to the closest person that this person, your child, might have, right? So we talk about inaccessibility, we talk about partial openness, we talk about openness and maybe sometimes closeness. And it could be from either end of, could be our child, it could be a season that the first parent might be in, or all those kinds of things that we talk about, that so that when people come to us, they're like, oh, we don't have to be perfect in this. We just have a goal here and we're gonna meet the goal.
And adoption is complicated.
Yeah, so much emotion, right?
So much emotion. And one of the things that I always think about as I reflect is this idea that no matter where you are in the adoption constellation, you've got to hold grief and joy at the same time, right? In both hands, grief and joy.
Yes.
And, you know,
Yes.
if you're an adoptee, you're going to have grief and joy. If you're a first parent, you're going to have grief and joy. And if you're an adoptive parent, you're going to have grief and joy. And all those emotions are there at the same time. And it's so complicated sometimes and hard to get through them. But I love what Sally said about the humanity. I mean, it's
Yes.
just the humanity for acknowledging that everybody in the party, everybody that you're dealing with has their own side of all of this. And, you know, you have to acknowledge and sit there with it. Yeah.
Yes, and wow. Linda, thank you so much for joining us today on Adoption Matters. Your wisdom, your vulnerability, and your advocacy are a gift to the adoption community. To our listeners, if today's conversation resonated with you, please share it with someone who may benefit. And don't forget to check out Linda's memoir, The Branches We Cherish. It is available now. Until next time, remember, every voice in the adoption constellation matters. And when we listen to each other, we grow stronger together. Thanks so much for joining us.